We're very happy to be here today. We've got a great panel, a great topic. Obviously, there's a lot of interest in this all around the world right now. Before we get started, though, I do want to just kind of set the stage about the organization that we are representing. And Katie, if you could pop those slides up, that'd be great. This webinar is being brought to you today by the Anthology Education and Research Center. If you're not familiar with Anthology, it is a relatively recent merger of a bunch of companies that makes us arguably the largest ed tech company out there. The center is a non-commercial hub inside this organization, if you could go to the next slide, that focuses on these guiding principles, right? We want to be able to generate thought leadership activities that lead to improving outcomes across the board, not just our clients. We want to be giving back to the sector. And we do this work in a number of different ways. If you could go to the next slide. We have 4 key impact areas: teaching, learning, and accessibility, which is, broadly speaking, the umbrella under which we're talking to you today. Enrollment, retention, and success, institutional and operational effectiveness, and then global access to digital education. And we're doing some interesting work in various places around the globe. This work is being done primarily by volunteers within the company. We do pay particular focus to historically Black colleges, universities, and community colleges in this work that we're doing when we're focusing on the United States. And on the next slide. And this is the work that we do, right? So we are trying to create actionable, topical research that can be leveraged by anybody. Content creation, this webinar is an example of that. We're going to have some stimulated conversations, and we're going to capture this, and folks can come back to it as well. Do white papers, blogs, etc., as well as host the occasional event. Thank you, Katie. Now, what I want to do is introduce our panelists for today. We'll be talking to them, asking a set of questions as we go through this, and you start to engage in these thought activities that we're being led by. Definitely be able to put your questions into the question section. We will collect those, and we'll leave time at the end to work back through those questions. So I'll start with Dr. Simon Mayahuski. I hope I got that right this time, Simon, after butchering it for years. Director of Digital Learning at the University of Illinois, Chicago. Suzanne Tapp, who's the Director of Teaching, Learning, and Professional Developments, the Teaching, Learning, and Professional Development Center at Texas Tech University, and Assistant Provost of Faculty Success. I love higher ed. We like to put ands in titles. And Dr. Brian Alexander, Senior Scholar at Georgetown University. And we're about to get started, but we also, going back to this idea of global, this is a global issue. I've got a 3-minute video from Dr. Sergio Mena, who is president of the Universidad Gabriela Mistral in Santiago, Chile. And he's going to talk about some of the work that they're doing very quickly.
Hello, I am Sergio Mena, President of Gabriela Mistral University in Santiago, Chile. At UGM, we have understood that innovation is part of the future challenge that all universities have. One example is that, like the rest of the world, our teachers have begun to explore ChatGPT as well as discussing the ethical dilemmas that this new technology brings. In this regard, I would like to share some thoughts with you. The invention of ChatGPT confirms 2 things that we already knew. The first is that our brain is for more novel tasks than storing and providing information, although many colleges and universities insist otherwise. The second is that there is a stark difference between knowing information and internalizing knowledge. Knowing what it is to be a good teacher is not the same as being a good teacher. At UGM, innovation has played an important role in recent years. A few years ago, we were the first university in Chile to open programs such as philosophy, psychology, or architecture in 100% online mode. The first to create some course in metaverse, to name a few innovations. But today, there are already many universities following our footsteps. Today, we were starting a pilot plan which involved the use of artificial intelligence through ChatGPT. This plan entails the creation of question and answer, the creation of case studies, and other mechanism for evaluating the learning of our students. I am convinced that this can save a lot of time for our teams and professors. Thus, they can allocate that time to other academic tasks. Regarding the students who enter engineering programs in our university, we have workshops and artificial intelligence tools that expose our students to the benefits, as well as the best way to use these AI tools. Some of our students have participated in workshops from the OpenAI company, the creators of ChatGPT. In these workshops, they use technology that allow the creation of realistic image and arts using the language of ChatGPT. In addition, we have incorporated an artificial intelligence course into the technology majors, leading to an IBM certification in the same area. As you can see, we have been very busy here at UGM, embracing the new technology of the 21st century and leading Chile into a new future. I hope to be able to tell you about the result and progress that we have achieved here at UGM soon. Thank you.
That's great. There's lots of exciting things going on around the globe, but the three of you in particular have been spending a lot of time thinking through this. Even before ChatGPT sort of sucked all the air out of the room, I know you all have been thinking about these kind of tools, artificial intelligence tools, machine learning, algorithms, the power, the promise, and the potential problems that we have with theirs. So let me start just by kind of knocking this one down real quickly. When ChatGPT first came onto the scene late last year, at least into the current consciousness, there was a collective hand-wringing from academics around the immediate leap was it's going to be used for cheating. Do we need to think about this as an arms race? Do we need to sort of, as it gets better, we've got to figure out our detection methodologies, or is another way through this issue? And I'll start with Brian.
I think that is the way that quite a few academics are going to think about it. There are people who are very invested in questions of academic honesty as part of their academic practice. There are also going to be faculty who, for other reasons, are very keen on academic honesty, such as adjuncts, which in the United States are the largest proportion of faculty, or faculty who are just under-resourced for teaching a class. You know, lecture of 100 students and they don't have a TA to help grade, that kind of thing. And for them, I think they're going to be very worried. A lot of them are going to be very worried about students plagiarizing. I don't think this is the entire population. I think the other faculty will have other approaches, which we can talk about. But I think the plagiarism arms race is definitely off and running, and it's going to continue to run for some time.
Simon, what are your thoughts?
Well, you know, I think the crisis that we are looking at is our inability to argue with authority. So as a ChatGPT document is generated, right, how do we as educators prove to the student that that actually is generated by ChatGPT? And if it is, you know, how do we show the sources? How do we sometimes if they're wrong, right, how do we argue with that to correct it? So when you Google something, you get some individual opinions and you can put something together. You know, Wikipedia has some sources to it. But right now, you know, the whole definition of AI here is that it's a black box, right? So even the programmers of it don't know how it comes up with the answers. So now as academics, we would like to shape minds and to teach skills where our new authority here is somewhat of a black box. And certainly the whole democratic process is about arguing, about discussing. There's an entire panel in Wikipedia for a conversation about a topic so that the right things surface up. We do not have that with ChatGPT, definitely. I mean, it is frozen in time. It's not learning anymore. But if Microsoft does sell a version of it that continues to learn, right, how do we make exceptions? The arguing with authority is not going to happen anymore.
That's great. Suzanne, what are your thoughts?
Well, you asked an interesting question, Rob, and you used language describing this as an arms race. And I think the language is dramatic, frankly.
Purposefully.
Purposefully, I understand that my experience has been that faculty come to us usually from one of three perspectives. Maybe it's a fight it perspective where they are really concerned, with good reason, about what happens to academic dishonesty with the entry of such easily accessed AI tools. Or maybe they come to us with the opposite use it kind of perspective and they're ready to jump in. Or maybe they're in the open-minded middle where they're watching to see what happens. And I think that's fair to approach it from any of those perspectives. You know, Brian suggested that we have folks who are under-resourced in the classroom. Maybe we have our large adjunct population who just have a huge teaching load, which could be overwhelming. And can I dare say that many of us are just burnt out? And so we have this new paradigm that we all have to learn about and figure out what to do with it and where we enter into this conversation. So isn't it fair that we wrestle with this and think, oh, is it an arms race or is that dramatic? What are we doing now?
So I think that is a great point, Suzanne. Sorry, Rob.
Nope, go.
And that actually brings up kind of our next question that we wanted to pose to y'all. And I'll ask Suzanne to start there. Suzanne, knowing your background in faculty development and that, we are seeing some amazing innovative practices starting to emerge with faculty. We just heard from our colleague in Chile talking about the innovative things that they are using ChatGPT and other forms of AI with. And so we know that there are faculty, there are staff, and there are students that are putting this AI into curriculum, into innovative practices. What are some of the innovations that maybe you have seen on your campus, or you have seen with colleagues or others in the field? What are some things that you are excited about that is coming with this new paradigm?
You know, Justin, what I'm excited about may seem simple, but it's actually not. And that is, I think the entry, I'm going to use an umbrella term of ChatGPT, assuming that it covers a wide range right now, but suggesting that ChatGPT is a paradigm shift and is reminding us to ask students to be critical thinkers and risk takers. So I think that, you know, we've had this shift in education away from a teacher-centered pedagogy to a student-centered pedagogy, and the AI is going to push us farther that way. So what I'm observing are faculty on campus who are doing this supposedly small thing that is actually quite big, and that is they're asking their students, what do you think about this? What do you want to do with it? How does this change our world? And asking students to dialogue with them about that. So an example is I have a colleague right now who's teaching an accessibility studies, disability studies course, and asking students to do what would be a traditional project, a research project, if you will, looking at the literature, looking at what others say, bringing that together. And then she's saying, put this in ChatGPT and let's analyze what comes back to us. Let's call this a revealed essay, if you will. What did you pull in from ChatGPT, from Bard, from whatever? Was it correct? Was it misinformed? Somehow did it match other sources that you saw? What questions did it bring to you? Did it sound like your voice? How did it differ from what you wanted to communicate? I love these questions. And I think they're innovative, actually. I know that Simon and Brian are going to have other really interesting examples, but I think that's an entry point kind of innovation to this conversation. And I'm seeing people do this all over campus and getting excited about what they're teaching.
Thanks. So Brian, I'll turn it over to you.
Well, thank you, Suzanne. I'm just nodding and saying that's really good. That's really good. Excellent, excellent. I think there are a lot of different ways of approaching this, and we're seeing those reflected in the way that faculty respond. For example, if we think about ChatGPT in particular, and also the chatbots that are similar to it, Google's Bard, Microsoft's Bing bot. It sounds like a bunch of sounds from a cartoon when I say it like that, but I think that that's one way of understanding these. They produce text, and they produce text to spec, and then in higher education we tend to think of that as writing papers, everything from the high school college essay to an undergraduate thesis. And I think there's a lot to that, and then that brings out into a few different directions. I mean, do we have students use ChatGPT, et cetera, as co-authors, or in Microsoft's term, as a co-pilot? We know from scholarly publication that we can't co-credit them, but nevertheless, they'll play that role. And I think that's one aspect. But another is to see, as Suzanne was mentioning, to turn things around, have ChatGPT et al. Write a paper for us, and then to have students critique it and figure out what's wrong with it or what's right with it. What does it mean to have that neutral point of view, that kind of bureaucratic language? A third is, I think, to be even more creative and to really press the limits of what ChatGPT et al. Can do as writers. So I'm sure many of you have done experiments like this where you say, okay, ChatGPT, write me a paper about the effect of the greenhouse effect on economics in sub-Saharan Africa. And then, okay, after you get that response, that's very good, but emphasize a more materialist lens. Okay, that's very good. Write it in Shakespearean verse. That's pretty good. Now make it rhyme. No, do it as a film noir detective thriller. So all of that is a lot of fun. Ian Bogost actually refers to this as playing the internet with ChatGPT. But I think that's one domain. The other domain is to think about ChatGPT, et cetera, as more multi-capacity tools, not just writing. So for example, I've been experimenting with having ChatGPT work as a simulation tool. So I instruct it by text to create a simulation for me, such as teaching a class. And it will simulate all the students, it will set up the class, and it will ask me questions. It'll assess how I did, it'll reproduce how I respond, it'll show the effects of that, and then assess my responses, and then give me another question, and so on. Acting kind of like a Dungeons and Dragons dungeon master, or like a simulation leader. I think down that route, we see quite a few different options that haven't really been fully explored. The idea of ChatGPT as a personal trainer or as a tutor, which is just one function, but also ChatGPT as a co-creator of something other than writing. Imagine, for example, doing an improv play like that, where ChatGPT provides a dialogue. So I think in that second domain, there's a lot of room for exploration. And that's thinking about ChatGPT version 4 that we just have. I'm trying to imagine how far that goes to version 5, 6, 7, 8. I think can go quite a few directions.
And Simon?
So back in 2017, my team participated in a hackathon, and we created software called Core Sentiment Stream, which basically would take LMS posts, discussion forums, feedback, assignments, and it would help the instructors see how happy their students were. So you could then graph throughout the semester, the sentiment of the class. The academic adoption of tools like that is difficult because they're costly. So we were unable to deploy it widely because, in fact, if ChatGPT wasn't frozen, I don't know that many of academics could actually afford it. So I think we do have to realize that we have a preview of the system. Later we played a lot with the natural language processing for Alexa apps, and created even one for Blackboard Learn at some point. But really what we see today is the capacity of instructors to automate the easy things. And sometimes, things like creating quiz questions. But, did you know that you can provide a prompt such as create a 5-question multiple choice quiz about Python arrays, and then format it as an import file for Blackboard Learn. And it actually will, properly format it. So all you have to do is just copy and paste that into Blackboard and generate a quiz, which is just a step away from a plugin where we would be able to auto-generate quizzes and implement them immediately in the LMS based on the student's needs, right? So we talk about personalization and we're talking about adaptive learning that's actually generated on the fly. However, the biggest opportunity I see so far is in accessibility. So think about a student who is using JAWS or NVDA and they are browsing your course, and it takes forever to read a page. So now the student is able to simply have AI process the page and then ask questions about it. What's in this page? Summarize. So the keyword summarize is really a gem, and I encourage you to try it with ChatGPT about paste in your syllabus and then say summarize, and then you can do questions about your own syllabus, right, without having to read the whole thing. So as JAWS encounters an image, we would expect that the student would be able to ask questions about it. What's in the image? What does it look like? And so, so far we're giving an alt tag to an image and, moving on. But for a student with disabilities to be able to have a dialogue with the textbook and dialogue with the content that the instructor deployed, it's tremendous progress. And this really is going to be probably a time when people with dyslexia are going to shine, because the step of reading and comprehending is going to be turned upside down so that you can actually immediately follow up into questions, but then also you can ask the chat to generate something such as computer code. And that's another huge, I think, detail that we need to realize. Most of the text and articles written today in English, which is a dominant language, of course, in the world, does not affect people's lives as much as computer code. So computer writing is the primary way we change people's lives. And I'll just give you examples like, how Facebook changes what we do with Twitter or all the other major systems. So ChatGPT allows you to generate computer code. So not only, a lot of people know that it speaks English, and that's great. You can write essays, but it can also write the magical computer code. And so for people who have not been trained in that, for people who have disabilities, to be able to write code, I think it's a huge progress.
Yeah, absolutely. And the mind starts to reel a little bit, and as we sort of think about the coming future in this. And this is a bit of how we find a balance between artificial intelligence and human intelligence. I think Sergio mentioned that in the video, right? That that these things need to be blended together. And in the realm of teaching and learning, for example, do we want to have a system? I know depending on the size of your class that you teach, the answer might change a little bit, but the idea of grading, right? So do we just let machines grade our work, or is that something we're going to reserve for ourselves? And I'd love to get your thoughts about this kind of trade-off. I guess the other way to phrase this question is, how are we going to work in harmony with these systems moving forward as we do our work? Suzanne, I'll start with you.
It's a really interesting question, and I think actually Simon just gave us a great example of bridging kind of the humanity of our world with artificial intelligence, as he talked about the accessibility benefits of tools like this. When I think about, what I want to do with my students, I'm thinking about qualities like critical reflection and collaboration and critical thinking. These are the skills that I want to hone in my students. There are other tasks that AI can do for me that can be used to check knowledge. I'm thinking of tools that on our campus we partner with our LMS, things like Feedback Fruit, where I can use components of AI, right, to check, did my students read the material so that I have a knowledge base, and then we can jump to a critical reflection. I'm thinking that there's some separation, particularly as I go back to my idea of feeling burnt out, frankly. I'm thinking about faculty on our campuses, wherever we are. Wouldn't we all like a tool that does some of the basics for us and allows us to go a little bit deeper with our content? So I think that I'd rather emphasize some of those deeper level skills and use AI to do, can I say, some of the busy work of teaching?
Yeah, exactly. Simon, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so I think that one of the biggest skills emerging, from this period of time is going to be writing great prompts, complex prompts, chained, thoughts. So perhaps there's an opportunity to grade the prompt instead of the essay, right? So we may adjust where the critical thinking really is in a multi-page prompt that is going to result, and let the grammar and the spelling just be assumed to be correct. I mean, if you're not using a word processor for your grammar, right? So I think it is excessively clear that one of the huge things that AI will do is it'll tutor. And looking back at Benjamin Bloom's the 2 sigma problem, right, where the most efficient or the most productive way to even you can increase a grade by 2 letter grades, right, is one-on-one tutoring. So how can we sort of open up that AI is mature enough so that when students explore it, they are actually benefiting? And I think that's sort of the step that we have to jump into. At the end of the day, we talked about cheating. AI is a master cheater. It was built on the idea that it actually doesn't know the facts, right? But through training, people are helping it to cheat its way through a conversation. So it's not really rational in thinking, but it's the Bayesian thinking where, hey, what's the most likely answer here? I mean, it's really great and everything that we read is based on that kind of a cheat through life approach. So more and more, I think we'll see where we want to train our own models, right? And maybe this is the model trained for computer class. Maybe there's another one that's for philosophy, and that's where the academics will shine again. But the idea of tutoring and one-on-one digging deep, having interactive, textbook interactive experience any time of the day with the course, I think that's going to be huge.
Ryan.
I completely agreed about the tutoring aspect. I mean, this has long been a dream of people in ed tech. It's been a science fiction dream going back to Neil Stephenson. And so this is something that we're already starting to see unfold. Right now, I've been comparing Duolingo for foreign language learning with what ChatGPT, Bard, and Bing can do. And it's very interesting to see the differences. I think one aspect of grading, to go back to an earlier point, is I think we'll definitely see a simple labor replacement, a swap of software for human time. I think that's going to be a no-brainer for quite a few instructors and also for quite a few administrators. Depending on on the micropolitics of institution, depending on the economics of institution, I think we're simply going to see that. And that may lead to reducing work for faculty in different fields. I think a second way that we may see this is, I'm really struck by Suzanne's point about transforming assessments so that we can make it deeper, much like in a writing class. Tools like Grammarly, tools like Microsoft Word, we have to, in theory, teach spelling and basic grammar less often. And I think there's that option where we can really help, if a tool like ChatGPT can help students get over the hump of a blank white screen and how scary that is and help them get going, then excellent. And we can focus on other things, including student voice and more creative writing. I do think, too, that we really have to rethink assessment in many ways as a whole. It may be that we have to start thinking more about scaffolding of assignments, which is not a new idea. I mean, that idea goes back quite a ways. But the idea being that it's going to take some time for a student to be able to use ChatGPT to generate every little bit of the scaffolded series. That might be more positive. Or this may help push practices like ungrading or no grading further into the mainstream. I think there's a potential for a great deal of creativity. And one last note, I would love to have students involved in this decision-making process to hear what they want from their projects of writing. And it's not just writing the humanities, writing the social sciences, writing the natural sciences, but I would love to have students involved in our design process.
Yeah, it strikes me that this idea of this being a turning point to change the way that we approach our pedagogical work, right? Many people have pointed out that we went through a similar thing in how we teach math with the introduction of the calculator, right? First it was banned, and then we learned to live with it, and then in fact help power and move to higher order questions that we're asking our students to conduct because they've got a tool that can help them do it. So I think we're seeing a similar inflection point here in how we do this work.
And a lot of the same arguments are repeated. You know, that they'll be de-skilled in basic skills, and we made it through. You know, we have calculators. I mean, it's funny, the calculator, like word processor, is one of those words that start off as a noun describing a physical object and is now a noun that describes software function.
Right, and that physical object was frequently a person.
Yes, even before that. Yes.
The word processor.
No, I have to say, I could not survive without Grammarly. I am horrible with spelling and grammar. Suzanne knows, we worked together for a long time. So Grammarly is great. So I appreciate what you're saying there, Brian, and kind of the use of some of these other tools. You know, I know when I taught, I would tell students, if you have no idea what you want to talk about on this given topic, you know, one way to start is look at something like a Wikipedia, just to, you know, don't cite Wikipedia, but go to the bottom of the page and look at those sources and kind of move off from there, just so you can have an idea. So one thing that came to mind as all three of y'all were talking, and it's a question that I've heard a couple of different times in conversations when you talk about the role of AI, ChatGPT, ChatGPT-4, you know, all of those things, and how it can kind of do some of these, to take Suzanne's word, kind of more some of the busy work kind of maybe out of teaching. Questions have come up on, will this replace that faculty member? And so, and I know this wasn't a question that we asked as a pre-question we gave you, but based on what you're saying here, I wanted to throw it out there. And I want to start with Simon, and then go to Suzanne and Brian. But, you know, will ChatGPT and these AI, will they replace faculty members, or what is that role of faculty as these things continue to progress?
Well, you know, I think that some of that frenzy that we have in academia right now is based on that fear, right? That, hey, how, you know, the assignments are no longer valid. Every time there's a twist with technology, you know, there are statements how it will revolutionize education, right? I mean, going back to radio, everybody was going to be, you know, super smart because radio came out, or you know, television, and then some things really worked. You know, Sesame Street was very, very good at teaching the foreign language. However, I think where we are today is realizing that it's a human, education is very much a human process. So just like online courses did not replace, you know, instructors, but it's also fair to say that people are not intelligent enough. I mean, I'm careful not to say that people aren't smart, but we've made a good business in education proving that, and maybe suggesting that we can help people, you know, think better and so forth. So the big question, I think, is that we're trying not to just train students, right? But we're trying to educate them, meaning we're trying to adjust their way of thinking, you know, what, how they communicate. So this idea of natural language processing, right, which is writing perhaps will not be as important as it's been so far. And the writing is not natural to human beings, right? We invented it as a way to preserve ideas. In fact, Socrates was quite angry about that. He felt that writing and textbooks were going to ruin people in general. So now we're able to use, and we have for a while, natural language to speak to devices. And now it turns out that the devices can teach us something, and we can go in depth. So I don't think academics need to be afraid of replacement, but we do have to learn who really is teaching the AI, right? So that's going to be a main predictor of how the models work. We have not yet mentioned that, but certainly bias is going to be a big part of it. So it's the teachers of AI, and who will assume that role, I think, is more important than whether or not we'll have teachers in general.
Okay. Suzanne?
Justin, here's the thing. I can't teach my students this technology. Frankly, it's changing too fast for me to keep up with. It's not my disciplinary background. It's not my area of expertise. So I know that about myself, but I also know that I can partner with my students and I can help them think about how this is changing their world and mine. And I can help my students think about what's coming for them in the future. So am I worried about AI replacing me? No, I'm not. I think we as teachers have heard this, for all kinds of things. Did the internet replace us? No. We still need humanity. So I still think we have a very important role.
And Brian?
I'm ambivalent about this, and I think it's a great question, and I think answers will play out depending on the institution. I think there is plenty of opportunity for replacing instructors. And that is, I mentioned reducing faculty hours, so taking full-time people, making them part-time, or just reducing the number of classes, or just not hiring faculty. The reason we can do this is because we can create some kind of experience if we cobble together a mix of perhaps part-time faculty with digital content, digital materials, and some form of ChatGPT, et cetera, that is actually skilled enough to do the full gamut of personalization, asking things, and then assessing them. It's going to take some tinkering to get that plugged into the full enterprise apparatus of an academic enterprise, but we can see that happening. And this would not be a better experience in some cases. This would be an inferior experience, but this leads us to a classic actual Christensen disruption. Christensen's idea was that you have a lower quality, lower priced entrance into the market, and that's what this would be. And we might say, wow, that sounds like an inferior market, but students looking at student debt, students who are poor, students who are coping with having to care for families, this might actually sound pretty appealing, especially for introductory classes or for classes in fields I'm not very interested in. On the flip side, though, I agree with Suzanne. I think that we have to make the case for instructors. As Simon and Suzanne both said, we've shown time and again, dating back to earlier electrical media, that we need instructors to perform key functions. For example, I'm really struck by Suzanne's point about us thinking critically about this. A minority of faculty, those who are in computer science, media technology, or science studies, can actually teach tech criticism. And librarians who work in digital literacy can help students think critically about this. That's not most faculty, but that's some. I think there's also a big role for faculty who have the skill to teach how to write parameters. That's a rapidly developing field, and that's definitely a skill. And I think we know this from a lot of digital technology, from the way that we teach simulations and games, that often we need instructors to help students transfer that learning from that digital environment into other ones. And that's where the instructor can really come in handy. It may be that we see both of these, replacement and non-replacement, or replacement and transformation, happening, and that's a struggle. But I think that's one that may just unfold starting about 5 o'clock.
All right, so a really exciting conversation today, but let's talk about potentially the dark sides. Let's talk about, in particular, bias. Many machine learning algorithms previously, when unleashed and engaging with people, kind of moved to the dark side pretty quickly, become racist or sexist. And in the business context of machine learning algorithms, we want to parse that out by understanding the data that it's being trained on. So what is that training data? Is it in itself biased? With these large language models, we don't have a way to, as far as I can tell, we don't have a good way to query what it's being trained on, because it's being trained on everything, essentially. So how do we detect, engage, alert? And part of this is just becoming, AI literate. I think that literacy function is what we need to impart to faculty and definitely to students, that they just don't take it and, as we've talked about already, just turn it in. There's errors in there. But how do we sort of make sure that what we are leveraging these tools to do is not inherently biased? I will start with you, Brian.
Well, there's several ways that have been described over the past 2 years based on the work of a lot of people doing critical analyses of big data and data analytics. One is to have more diverse representation among the teams that are actually constructing these tools. Another is to be deliberate and conscious about this and in the functioning of these tools. But the third, then I think Kathy O'Neill did really good work on this in trying to remind us to look at the source material that we get, the data that we gather, and to make sure that that is actually equitable. And that can take some time, and it may be that the data is deeply flawed and we need to account for it, or even to start from scratch and gather new data. I'm heartened that ChatGPT and others have demonstrated guide rails, which have tried to reduce that kind of thing. I mean, the example that scares people is from some years ago, Microsoft's Tay. I'm sure you've all heard that story. And the guardrails seem to be pretty good in a lot of ways. The Intercept ran a darkly entertaining piece about someone who asked ChatGPT to describe how to torture, or which populations it was okay to torture, and ChatGPT said, "No, I'm not going to do that. That's wrong." So the person asked it to write a Python program that would identify which populations it was okay to torture. And said, "Oh, right," and off it went. And North Koreans were one of them, by the way, if you're curious.
Wow.
So I think that problem of bias is one that we're going to have to be very, very careful with. But this does lead to a question, which is, do we participate in maintaining or strengthening such bias by simply using these tools? By right now asking ChatGPT about itself, by using one of those art programs to generate images, are we actually tacitly endorsing and helping strengthen such a tool? There's an argument there for actually not even using these tools right now as a result.
Excellent, thanks. Suzanne, what are your thoughts?
This is a great question. And I think we have a responsibility as educators to help our students understand that we're working with something that's in most cases predicting text, not generating knowledge. And we have to ask our students to ask questions to identify how that text got generated. Where did those patterns come from? You know, Brian mentioned playing the internet. And this is one of the first things that I did with my students in January when the semester started, is I said, you know, let's play with ChatGPT. So we put in a couple of prompts. We decided to stick with something we all knew well, and that was Texas, for good or for bad. And we asked ChatGPT some questions about Texas and began to narrow those down. And we asked ChatGPT to take on, write about Texas as if you were writing in the voice of Taylor Swift. That was awesome. Write about Texas in a Friends episode. Write about Texas as if you were a 7th grade boy. This is where it started getting really interesting. You know, when ChatGPT began saying somewhat dated words, but, you know, throwing in these words like, hey, bruh, this is fire, what's up? And I said to the students, where is it getting this? Which 7th grade boys? Who? How? How did ChatGPT get this? These are the kind of questions that we need to ask. You know, and I started there because it was accessible to my students. And then I can go much, much deeper. We had a lot of fun with it. And I think that's a fair place to start, to go deeper and say, now what? Why aren't we hearing the voices of women and children? And why are we focused on a white male cisgender voice right here? So exactly. I like that idea, that accessible entry into a difficult conversation about bias and where this information is coming from.
Yeah. Simon, your thoughts?
Well, you know, I think that machines in general have the opportunity to be unbiased, right? So there's some hope there. However, computers in general have a long history of bias. You know, let me just mention that those who are freed from Auschwitz would recall IBM, you know, as being the maker of the counting machines, and it was you know, Thomas Watson, the founder of IBM, who received a special medal from Hitler, right? So technology tends to amplify the biases of the people that use it, and so we have many examples of the biases of engineers, right? That then later were translated, saying in Google image search that when you search for African Americans, it would show or identify them as animals. So these biases, though, could be fixed, right? And so Google took the responsibility and identified the problems. That's going to be more difficult with AI. So the question again is, who is the AI learning from? So far, we see that OpenAI has used workers in Kenya, paying them less than $2 per hour to identify very problematic expressions and situations. So the bias is going to be rolled in with whoever is training the AI. At the same time, it's fair to say that we know that AI is already biased to English-speaking world. Right. That AI is biased when it comes to digital divide. Right? No internet, no AI. So we see this being already built in. But the big problem is when we do find that the model, maybe ChatGPT 4 or 5, when the model basically runs away and it becomes biased, how do we fix it? It's going to be very difficult because again, nobody really knows how it works. It's that black box idea, but it's nobody's really asking who is going to fix the problems, right? We're all excited about having access and generating the content.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Go ahead.
So we've talked a lot about kind of what y'all are seeing in terms of faculty, how these things could impact education, formative assessment, summative assessment, building tests, all of that. I'm curious because you're all on different institutions, different types of institutions. What are you hearing from students, and what have you heard from them? What do they think about these kind of improvements or enhancements or changes to the way they are pursuing their education? And so I want to start with Simon.
Well, students are of course way ahead of us on this, and AI was not born with ChatGPT. It's just a free version that we got to experience. It's fair to say that Russia has used AI for a long time to talk to people, right? So I think students are ahead of us because sometimes they are willing to license and to pay a little bit for the tools that are available out there. But students also are thinking, I think, about AI somewhat differently. I already mentioned that writing computer code is important, but if you open your mind, AI happens to also write DNA today, right? So what will be the impact and the result? You know, we're talking about how expensive it'll probably become because of how much the computational resources cost. But we really have a global computer system that's doing almost nothing today, and that's the cryptocurrency system, the Bitcoin. And students are, you know, more likely to own cryptocurrency than maybe their instructors. But here's a platform that could actually support AI, and it could make it very inexpensive. In addition, you know, AI happens to run on GPUs, which is exactly what cryptocurrency does. So NVIDIA, you know, hardware is sort of driving this innovation. I think the key though for students is to and they understand that in order to be successful, you have to have quality data. And so this data democratization that we see and making data available so that you can at least change your context, if not train your own model, is going to be key. So in many ways, I think students are quite ahead of us on this.
Brian?
Crypto brings to mind a joke I heard from an economist, which was that Bitcoin is basically the world's slowest, dumbest, and most expensive spreadsheet ever devised. And I think that's kind of, in many ways, one of the nicest things we can say about it, but I do appreciate someone finding that link. What I'm hearing, I teach some interesting students at Georgetown. I run into some interesting students in my work at their campuses. The first thing that comes up is a sense of historical awe. I've had several students ask me if this was what it was like when I first saw the World Wide Web appear, or when I first ran into the internet, or when smartphones really took off. So I mean, there is that sense that they are stumbling across something big, and not just big and entertaining like TikTok, but big as in having much deeper impact. A second is my students talk about plagiarism all the time. One student talked about over a spring break going to another country and finding the majority of students he talked to had already used ChatGPT to write papers. So that was already there. But that gives the most cynical of them are like, okay, that's it, that's done. But others of them, the more reflective ones, are wondering, okay, well, what's the purpose of these assignments now? Why do we have these writing assignments? What's the point of all of this? The third thing that I'm hearing from a few, and this is partly because people know me, I've just published a book on academia and climate change, which just came out today. In fact, University is on fire, Johns Hopkins University Press. Now is your chance to grab a copy. They wonder about the environmental cost, not necessarily so much the cost of an individual query. So if I say, ChatGPT, please write an epic poem where Simon plays an evil magician, instead, the huge carbon cost involved in training a massive data set. And there's an open question, is that worth it? Is that something that we should keep doing and keep allowing? And those data sets are just getting larger. Yes, we're getting more efficient at processing them, but the idea is to make them larger still. And so I hear some of that concern from students as well.
Suzanne?
You know, one thing that I haven't heard so far, I love the responses that both Simon and Brian have shared, but I've also seen, we know that students come from multiple points of entry into our classrooms, and I have seen, I'm generalizing, but some of my non-traditional students who perhaps have less familiarity with tech, you know, have fear about AI entering the classroom and adding yet another burden to their learning, another task that they need to master. I think, you know, like you, I've seen surprise and a little bit of shock and awe from students recognizing the wheels turning, oh, this is a game changer. This is going to change everything. But I do want to balance that and say, I also see students with a little bit of distrust or fear. And then, you know, frankly, there are students who have that gleam in their eye who say, oh, you know, and think about what they might be able to do, let's say to save time.
Yeah.
Well, what they can do, I mean, one of the things that I find fascinating, a couple of my students have been floating ideas about this, is the crazy creativity. So some of my students started making fake movie posters using Midjourney, movies that didn't exist, right? So let's give this a year and wait to the point where we could say, okay, ChatGPT version 12 or whichever, please not just write me a script for a movie according to these parameters, but give me a rough video of that. Show me Stanley Kubrick's Napoleon, and I want it to star Christopher Walken as Napoleon instead. Go. Or give me a computer game, which is even easier. Give me a role-playing game, Japanese style, taking place with Rob Robinson as the hero, and set this up with this many players. Go. That amount of creativity, I think we're just beginning to discover.
If I may add, in 2005, there were students who were able to write a randomizer program that was able to publish, right, to a conference, a scientific paper proving that sometimes students are way too creative. But I think that's what we will see, is that they will find ways to surprise us. It's though important to, I think, note that soon everybody will be using AI. Now, whether it's OpenAI or not, for the same reason that everybody today is using Linux. Now, you might say, hey, I use a Mac, I use Windows. Well, no, if you touch Google, touch Amazon, you are actually, right, using Linux. So I think that that's what we'll see with a layer of plugins. So right on top of what we know today, as a chatbot, there's going to be plenty of plugins. Grammarly, of course, came up already that using AI, but basically any service that will try to be competitive will have to employ AI. So our students will be using it not knowingly, and those who are very intentional, they'll make the best of it. I do want to mention a possibility and the need to recognize open source, because much of the AI work has been moved forward by open source, which means that suddenly you have a lot of people looking at the code and adjusting. We talked about some of the bias that can be removed that way. However, right now, right, it's a proprietary Microsoft owned tool. The moment it opens to open source, I think we'll see students and across the world really playing with it and creating things that will be impressive.
This is such a great conversation. I'm so thrilled to have participated in it. And Simon, your last comment, I'm sure at many ed tech companies like the one I work for, they're thinking about this deeply. I know our product developers are, about how do we layer on top of what we already have. We are at time, unfortunately. I appreciate the questions that we got. I've seen several questions that came through. I feel like we answered most of them, probably not in the detail that some of the folks would have liked, but I didn't want to interrupt this amazing conversation. And so at this point, I'd like to say thank you to our panelists. It was a very stimulating discussion. This has been recorded and it will be available, so we can go back and get re-stimulated sometimes when we need to think about this. And so with that, I'll give everybody the rest of their day back, and I say thank you very much.
Thank you all. Thanks for hosting.